Hello and welcome. My name is Jed Hopkins. I'm the Programme Lead of the undergraduate BA Honours Programme in Education. In this short video, I want to give you a small taste of the programme by showing you part of a seminar session in philosophy of education. My colleague Maura Murray will present a glimpse of a SEND session. So why do philosophy of education? Well, there are many answers to that, but here's one. When we do philosophy of education, really when we do philosophy generally, we are thinking about things that normally are taken for granted and seem obvious. But thinking deeply about them results in us seeing that these same things are not understood as well as we thought. Such an obvious thing is perhaps education. Surely we all know what this means. We've all been to school after all. Yes, but when we try to articulate what we think it means, it may start to feel strange, and actually that will be a good thing. Maybe something like this is what education itself is essentially about, making the familiar seem strange. At least that seems to be an idea that the educator Kieran Egan seems to favour. Here's an interesting quote for you to read. From Egan's perspective, education involves enchantment, imagination, becoming fascinated and intrigued, seeing things in new ways. I suppose it would be the opposite of boredom or indifference. How about this for an idea of what education means? I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only make them think, said Socrates, the ancient Greek philosopher, who was so committed to having people think for themselves that he was prepared to die for it. And here he is in a famous painting by David taking the hemlock. For him, and for his star pupil, Plato, education is a journey of the soul towards the truth of things. A journey of the soul towards the truth of things. Wow. It's probably going to be a difficult journey, where the teacher or your school provokes the student, you perhaps, provokes you into thinking. Difficult, but very meaningful. Here's a different idea again. This one is by the poet and practical philosopher Henry David Thoreau, who wrote a book called Walden, published in 1854, where he describes his experiment of living very close to nature. He committed himself basically to living in a wilderness or wood, and he wrote this as to why he wanted to do it. I went to the woods because I wanted to live deliberately. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to put to rout all that was not life, and not when I had come to die discover that I had not lived. He pointed out that too many of us lead lives of quiet desperation. Yuck, who wants that? So there was a person who wanted to experience life to the full. So is that what education, true education as it were, is all about? Living life to the full. And we could ask some deep questions of ourselves from all of this. Do we live deliberately? What does that mean exactly? Do we seek meaning in our lives? Why are we here if we don't? Or are we more sympathetic to a Socrates or a Plato being committed to the truth of things? Perhaps that is what education is really about. But what makes something the truth? Or is education more to do with enchantment and imagination, as Kieran Egan implies? If so, what enchants us? What gets our imagination going? Is education about simply developing our interests? All of these questions relate to the big question of this session. What can be thought when we think about the meaning of education? Education can certainly mean many things, but we have to wonder, why this and not that? And what could be our reasons for saying so? It could mean quite a few more things than are presented here, almost certainly. Now, if this was a real class, I'd ask you to share your ideas about 2 or 3 of the questions, and maybe also to share what other ideas you have about the meaning of education. The idea here is not to be right or wrong, but to get ideas from each other as a prelude to doing some independent writing and studying later on. Writing out our thoughts and sharing them is very informal here, very non-judgmental. And this is the case whether sharing ideas is done online or face-to-face. It doesn't really matter. It's basically to share our ideas. So let's continue as though we really had done some actual group sharing. The unexamined life is not worth living, Socrates is supposed to have said, though it's recorded by Plato. So is this how we should think about education? Essentially an opportunity to reflect on what our lives mean. Well, it has something going for it, perhaps. Oscar Wilde, the wit, poet and dramatist, might agree, but he adds that a life unlived isn't worth examining. So it's not just about reflection, but getting on with it. And others half-jokingly have questioned whether all this examination and reflection is all that it's cracked up to be. Plato says that the unexamined life is not worth living, but what if the examined life turns out to be a clunker as well, says the novelist Kurt Vonnegut. The unexamined life may not be worth living, but the life too closely examined may not be lived at all, Mark Twain warns. Okay, let's pause here. What do you think? Is the unexamined life not worth living? And can you see how these ideas, though presented as a mere sketch, are somewhat in tension? To end this session, here's a final task for you to work on collaboratively in your pod groups. Consider the following statements. And by the way, they were all said by real people. And notice that they all reference the word education. My dog is well trained, but not educated. Trained, but not educated. Volunteering at the Drug and Alcohol Rehabilitation Centre was a real education. She was very well educated. She got a first at Oxford. Personally, I hated my education. The most educated person I know didn't go to school. Some say society can't afford to educate. I say society can't afford not to. It might be interesting to speculate what the context is for each statement. Who might the speaker be? But more to the point for this presentation, I'd like you to think about what the person who says it understands the concept education to mean. No doubt the individuals who said these statements weren't thinking they were tapping into historical philosophical ideas about the meaning of education. But everything we think has a philosophical implication, and knowing something of this can make us a better thinker. So I'd like you to try and figure out what understanding of education is presupposed in each of these statements. And again, of course, this would be a group activity. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that, and of course it would undoubtedly be a lot more enjoyable if we were a real class and truly able to communicate our ideas and questions and share. Hey, perhaps we will be one day. Well, I really hope so. Bye-bye.